Welcome to the With You Rugby podcast, designed to give you an in-depth look at the United States Rugby Foundation, including our grant programs and recipients, fundraisers, events, and much more. Now let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Vizard, President of the United States Rugby Foundation. And as we get closer to our 2024 U.S. Rugby Hall of Fame induction ceremony presented by Major League Rugby, we thought it'd be nice to get to know this year's Hall of Fame inductees and special award recipients just a little bit better. And today we welcome in former player and former board member for the Eastern Rugby Union and the USA Rugby Union, and an IRB Women's Advisory Committee member and a 2024 U.S. Rugby Hall of Fame inductee, Jami Jordan. Welcome, Jami. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
And are we talking to you at your home here today? Are you at work? Where are you?
You are talking to me at my home over in Lake George, New York. We just literally moved here on Thursday, and I've been very fortunate that I've been retired for 7 years.
Oh, nice! Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, and Jami, as we do with all our honorees and inductees, tell us a bit about your upbringing. Where did you grow up? What sports did you play when you were a kid and in high school?
So my childhood, it really kind of cut across two different parts of the country. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and I lived there until I was 12. And then my family moved to Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, which is just a few miles from Harrisburg. And, as a kid growing up in Atlanta, I didn't play any organized sports because there weren't any for girls at the time. So it was in the 60s. But when I moved to Pennsylvania and started high school, they did have organized sports. And so I started playing field hockey in 9th grade, and I continued through my senior year. And then after Title IX was passed in 1972, the first ever girls track team was created, and I joined it, and I ran the mile for a number of years.
Oh, cool. Well, after high school, then you attended Penn State University. You didn't play rugby at Penn State, but did you hear about the sport or watch any games while you're on campus?
I wish I could say that I did. So rugby in the late 70s at Penn State was really just becoming a nascent club sport. It wasn't anything like their program today. And so I didn't know about it and didn't realize that rugby was played there until after I had left, and I went to Chesapeake, and we made a return trip after about a year to play the Penn State team. But, the first time that I ever saw a rugby game was actually in South Africa in 1975. I was an exchange student there, and a new friend took me to a club game, and it was in a packed stadium. And I have to say that it really made quite an impression on me.
So was that after or before then you joined Chesapeake?
Oh, it was before. That was in high school.
Okay.
In 1975. Yep.
And what made you join the Chesapeake Women's Rugby Football Club? How did that happen?
Well, so in the spring of 1980, I had to do a practicum to finish my degree in early childhood education. And at the time, my sister, Suzanne Jordan, lived in Baltimore, and she had been playing for Chesapeake for a number of years. And so to me at 21, Baltimore seemed like a good place to go. And I found a small daycare center where I could do an internship. And then when I told my sister about my plan, she said, well, if you move to Baltimore, you have to play rugby because we need recruits. And so it sounded like a good way to meet friends. I had played field hockey, so I understood a field sport. And that is how I came to Chesapeake.
All right. Well, you played with Chesapeake from 80 to 86. Tell us about your playing career. What positions did you play, and what were your strongest playing attributes?
So because, my sister was already on the team and she was fast, the selectors thought that there was some genetic carryover, and they thought that it would be a great idea to put me at wing. And it was a disaster. And thankfully, they quickly realized I was better suited in or near the pack. And so I played hooker, scrum half, and flanker during my time at Chesapeake. And I would say that a strong playing attribute was, I was tenacious. So back then, forwards followed the ball and they made it available to the backs. And I liked being close to what I perceived was the action, which was usually at the bottom of a ruck. And so, I shifted positions, and the reason that I did, it was really a practical team matter. I moved to scrum half because that position opened up and I was one of the few people who could actually pass the ball to the fly half. And then once we got another scrum half, I moved to flanker.
All right. Well, good for you. Okay. So while you were with Chesapeake, you became the club's match and social secretary. Did you realize at that time, hey, this is kind of fun and I'm good at this? Or was it a different reaction?
Well, I originally held those positions because we took turns as club members. And since I was new, the older players were happy to have someone else do the work. I've always been organized. And so I didn't find the work hard. Being a social secretary was definitely more fun because you got to plan a party for every home game. And, match secretary was different back then because you had to, mail directions, snail mail ahead of time to the clubs, or you had to relay them via, a phone. And we're not talking about a cell phone. We took turns and that's how I came to it.
Okay. In 1986, you joined the Maryland Stingers. You played there through 1991. The Stingers are starting to make a name for themselves on the East Coast around that time. What were some of your fondest memories or highlights from your playing days with the Stingers?
Yeah, I joined Maryland because I wanted to play more competitive rugby. Chesapeake and Maryland were in the same league, and so anyway, that's what I wanted to do, and I feel like that I accomplished that, and I thoroughly enjoyed the whole 15s experience and making it to our first ERU playoff. That was a big deal. But my fondest memory as a Stinger was as a sevens player. In 1986, Marty Watts and I hatched this plan that we wanted to go with the team to Cape Fear, and we wanted to win that tournament. Cape Fear was a big tournament. It was kind of a big deal at the time, and Florida State had been the reigning champions for a number of years, and so that was what we set down as a goal. And so we wrote down on the names of the players that would be in the final on a cocktail napkin one night in January, and then we signed up for a sevens clinic that Emil Cygnus was giving in February, and then later in the spring we taught the team what we had learned. And then, every player that we had on that napkin, save one, was in the final against Florida State. And it was really just a terrific experience, being there and playing in front of a crowd. It was so fun. And when we won, it really helped Maryland be able to recruit other players. We already had Krista McFerrin playing on the team, but we were able to recruit people like Anita Pease and Julie Drustrup. Both of them went on to be Eagles. So it was an all-around great experience being there.
Fantastic. And while you were with the Stingers, you served on the Eastern Rugby Union Board. How did that opportunity arise? And what was your role or roles with the ERU?
Right. So I have to kind of step back to Chesapeake because my teammate and prop, Joan Bossman Gordon, she was the club's representative to the Potomac Rugby Union. And so she was the one going to the meetings. And since we were also roommates, she decided to, kind of pack me along to a couple of the PRU meetings. And so it was there that I met a number of women from the DC area who were already very engaged. Judy TCA, Elizabeth Still, Pat Brownell, to name a few. And as it turned out, the chair of the ERU Women's Committee position had been open for a little while. And so they thought that I should do it, and they talked me into it. And I have to tell you, I really had no idea what I was signing up for. However, it was at the ERU board that I met Bill Hafner, and he became a really important mentor to me for pretty much the rest of my rugby administrative career. And so I quickly learned that, if you went by the guidelines that, Hafner laid out, he was secretary at the time, then, you needed to write your reports, talk about your activities, come prepared to the meetings. He really helped me understand how to be a good board member.
And around that same time, you served on the USARFU board. What were your roles with USARFU?
So with USARFU, I was the chair of the women's committee from 1989 to 1993. And, that committee was comprised of the different territorial reps. And so they were the ones that were the voting members. And so I was representing them. So the primary reps at the time were Leslie Jameson, Leslie Brandt, Trudy Grout, and Colleen Lanigan. And so, I was really representing the women's game there at the board meetings. And then after that, I was on the executive committee. I was a secretary of USA Rugby.
And you took over as chair of the women's committee and guided the USA women's team to the first ever World Cup in 1991. Now, I know there were a lot of obstacles for the team ahead of that event. Can you highlight a few of those and what was done to overcome those obstacles?
Yes, there were obstacles. The period between 1987 and 1991, I feel really held a lot of change for rugby in the US. And I say it like that because it was during this time that women were demanding to have national events and international events to play, to have the national team play. And so we were sometimes refused by the national governing body. And so when that happened, we would figure out a workaround, and we would hold our own events. So for example, in 1988, we wanted to reciprocate with Canada and host Can-Am. They had held the first Can-Am in 1987. And so we wanted to do that, but the person who was putting in the bid, there was also a men's Can-Am game that was going to happen in 1988. But the person who was putting in the bid did not support the women's game. And so we could not be part of that event. And, we were also told that we couldn't call the team the Eagles, and that we could not be part of the Lands End contract. And so we knew that the gentleman in Saranac Lake had previously hosted a men's Can-Am, and they ran a big tournament up there, and they still do every year. And so we approached them and asked them if they would host the women's Can-Am, and they agreed to do that. And so we needed jerseys for and we were actually able to establish kind of a bit of a relationship with some product guys from Lands End. And so they were there to take some pictures for the catalog. Now, mind you, we couldn't be part of the contract, but they were happy to put us, some players on the front of the catalog. But they also supplied some jerseys to us. And, and I think maybe some other team kit. They did take us out to dinner. So they paid for a dinner for the team. And for a logo, we used the old, what we call the Women's Committee logo. And so, in January of 1990, the Women's Committee, we had a long discussion about whether or not we should be the Ospreys or the Spirit, because we felt like we needed a name. We had been calling ourselves, or the team, the women's national team, then, for a number of years. And so we voted against that. And we decided we're going to be the Eagles, and we have every right to be the Eagles because that's the national team. And, I guess that had been enough turnover at the probably in the national office, maybe at the board level. And so we never asked permission again for permission. We just started referring to the team as the Eagles. And so when the jerseys were ordered for the World Cup for 1991, the logo that was actually sewn on by the manager was the USA Rugby logo. And so really sometimes waiting and not asking for permission pays off, I mean, the long and the short of it is that the women's committee, we just never accepted no as an answer, and we just plowed ahead. And I don't feel like it's an overstatement to say that the women's committee at that time was essentially running women's rugby for the country.
And you guys had great success in '91, right? First World Cup winners ever. So congratulations on that. What are some of the highlights from the World Cup?
Oh, geez, from the World Cup. We first played the Netherlands in we were in Wales, and we were at Pontypool, and it was pouring rain, and it was raining so hard that there were just puddles everywhere. And the locals were like, we'd never let the game happen if it wasn't the World Cup. But they let us play. And so that was the start for the team, was in this, torrential downpour. That kind of stood out. And the hotel we were in was this, it was this little hotel, and we kind of took over there was this bar area that we called the library. And so that was the team's meeting room, because we didn't have meeting rooms or that type of facility at all. So, we just took over that space. We called it the library, and the hotel was great about it. They let us do that. And, the whole experience of being in a rugby playing country was really just quite marvelous to be there, and to see the national stadium in Cardiff, to see it fill for a club game that we attended, a men's club game, full. It was so exciting, and you really captured the full spirit of the sport.
In 1991, a busy year for you, as you also oversaw the creation of the first USA Women's Collegiate Championship division. What inspired the creation of that division, and were there more obstacles in getting that competition off the ground?
Yes. Let's see. So in 1990, it was clear to the women's committee that women's collegiate rugby was on the rise, and that there was enough momentum and demand to hold nationals. And we understood that the collegiate program was the future of the game. Many people understood that. For both men and women. And so we determined that we would hold collegiate nationals in 1991 alongside club nationals, which at the time was on Memorial Day weekend. And you might imagine that there was a lot of push-pull between the women and men who were administrating collegiate rugby. The collegiate committee was focused on the men's game, and they did not want to include the women. And, when I look at some of the reports or letters, and we were all very passionate and opinionated, and we used strong words with each other about having the event, or the appropriateness of having the event. And, it did accurately reflect the difficulty we were all experiencing in getting the women's collegiate competitions off the ground. You know what? But we did it. We held the first collegiate nationals in May of 1991, basically a month after the U.S. women's team won the World Cup. Everybody came back, and we had, club nationals a month later. And so the collegiate teams, they came, I'm pretty sure that they only played 25-minute halves. And really, if you think about it, we did hold that event 3 weeks after collegiate players had taken their finals and left campus. And, looking back, it was the dead wrong time of year, but the teams, they all attended, they all competed, and they all wanted more, including longer halves. And so really it was a determination of both the women's committee and the collegiate women at that time in 1991 that launched what is now just an incredible set of collegiate programs.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the success of the 91 women's team had a lot to do with that collegiate tournament being pulled off?
I surely think that it definitely had a positive influence. I mean, the many of the players who were at the World Cup were also at club nationals because they were playing for many of the top teams in the country. And while yes, it was it was an imperfect time of year for the collegiate teams, we could be with them at club and they could see the club nationals, and they could see and they could feel the spirit of the women's game. And I absolutely believe that had an effect and a very positive influence on the collegiate programs.
Hey Jamie, during the second Women's Rugby World Cup in Scotland in 1994, administrators from the U.S., England, and other competing nations met to form the first worldwide women's organization. Mm-hmm. The IRB incorporated the group and named it the IRB Women's Advisory Committee. You were on that committee from 94 to 2002. Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy that experience? And what were some of the accomplishments of the Women's Advisory Committee while you served on it?
Right. So there were 3 of us originally that served on the first Women's Advisory Committee. There was Rosie Golby from England, Jill Zonneveld from Canada, and myself. And I believe, we imagined at the time that we would be doing real development work and supporting the women's game in countries, where they really weren't supporting or getting support from their home union. And we thought, well, we're an IRB committee, and certainly we would be able to have influence. So that's not exactly what happened. Because the incorporation of the committee, with the IRB, it meant that the IRB had to support Women's World Cups. And they really utilized our group to help determine the siting and the number of teams that would compete at the successive World Cups. And we did expand the committee to include some members from Europe so that we had a better representation. And, understanding how the IRB worked or learning that and the circumstances in the women's game internationally was like that was a big learning for me. And I was often critical at the time of USA Rugby. And I have to say that I came to better appreciate that at least in the US and Canada, we were in better shape organizationally than most. And really, I have lifelong friends from my time on that committee. And I kind of think that, you can't ask for much more than that.
Now, the Eagles had great success at those 2 first Women's World Cup, winning the gold in 91, taking silver in 1994. Past Eagle Barb Fugate said in your nomination to the Hall, the World Cup gold and silver medals won by the United States in 1991 and 1994 would never have been a reality without Jamie's national and international leadership. Now, that's pretty powerful stuff, Jamie. That's got to make you feel pretty good.
It is powerful to read that. And yes, it does make me feel like it was all worth it. I mean, really, what hasn't been mentioned is the U.S. women went on to the compete in the final in the 98 World Cup as well. So in 3 successive World Cups, they were in the finals. But, so it really wasn't until 2019. So when Carrie Heffernan asked me to help her with a little history project for the Women's Rugby Coaching and Referees Association, that I took the opportunity to reread my files from back in the day. And it was only then that I realized just how much the women's committee and the national team players accomplished in the face of controversy at every step. I mean, I had left the game, basically. And so I had kind of put everything aside. But that experience of opening up that box of history was really important. And to realize that we never stopped to celebrate what we were doing. It was just on to the next problem that needed to be solved. And so it has really been very meaningful to reflect on that time and to appreciate all of the women who came before me and those that were really arm in arm with me throughout. And so it has definitely been a good reflective experience for me.
That's wonderful. Jami, you stayed involved with the U.S. women's national team in various roles from 2002 before stepping away from rugby leadership roles in 2004. What were some of your duties during this last run with the national team?
So it was kind of late 2001, I think, because it was just ahead of the 2002 World Cup. So Ann Barry and Mary Dixie asked me to re-engage with the women's team program, and they imagined this job that it was a huge job in my view. It was all of the administration for the team, not the direct team management, and all marketing and promotion. And I looked at that and I thought about my strengths and I said, okay, I can do the administrative part of this. I can do half of this job. Anybody could only do half, but I'm going to take the administrative aspect. And so I did. And so I kind of wound up that most decisions regarding the team, obviously not like playing and selection and so forth, they really ran through me. And so here's an example of the kind of things that I would be engaged with. So Doug Arnott was the CEO of USA Rugby at the time, and he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, we have a new jersey design, and it's coming out, and can you take a look at them?" And I said, "Sure." And he sent me the mock-ups, and I called him back and I said, "Doug, the colors are white and light blue. The U.S. team wears red, white, and blue." And he said, "Well, yeah, but I mean, it's Carolina blue." And a lot of teams wear that color. And I said, "Well, I appreciate that, but it's a women's national team and they're only going to wear red, white, and blue. And, I kind of doubt that, that you're having this conversation with the men's team about wearing light blue and white." And so our conversation concluded and the women wore the new jersey design in red, white, and blue. But those were the types of things that I engaged with during that period for the national team program.
Now, Jami, as you know, as we all know, a lot of the people within this country knew what you were doing for the women's game, but your role in the advancements of the women's game is also recognized by those outside our borders. As Canada women's rugby legend Jill Zonneveld said this: "During the past 20 years, 6 women's World Cups have been played. Women play in 5 regional tournaments. Funding has increased. Women now play in HSBC 7 circuit. World Rugby has a high-performance women's committee. And many women now sit as board members and or as members within national, international, and world rugby committees. Women referee and coach at all levels of the game, domestically and internationally. Jami has been an essential part of these successes." Now, that's another strong endorsement. What does it mean to you that the women's game has come so far and that you played such a large role in making that happen?
So in 2010 at the World Cup in England, Rosie Golby and I were sitting next to each other, and we were pinching ourselves. We were overjoyed at the attendance of about 13,000 people. It was a bigger number than we could imagine, and we knew in our hearts then that what we had dared to dream and worked for was, it felt like it was starting to come true. And so, like, fast forward to 2023 in New Zealand, and Rosie was there, and so she's messaging Jill and me, and we were just over the moon at what was happening, and just seeing so many people in the stands. There were definitely some tears of joy shed.
Well, congratulations. You've done so much for the women's game. Now, of all your rugby memories and accomplishments, is there one or two that stand above the rest?
Yeah, from a playing standpoint, I mentioned my time at Maryland. I think that witnessing the unbridled joy of that 91 team when they won the World Cup that's probably at the top. I knew and I know what it took to get them there. And I know what the players sacrificed to make it happen. And so that was an amazing moment. And I think that also there's probably one more. There are many more, but another standout would be that I was part of the group who helped select Kathy Flores as the first woman coach of the U.S. team, and so that definitely stands out as well.
And Jami, looking back on your rugby career, what are you most proud of?
So one time at a board meeting, Clarence Culpepper looked at me and said, "We just thought y'all would go away, but you didn't." And I looked back at him and I said, "No, Clarence, we did not go away. We are still here." And in some ways that kind of sums it up. So despite great odds, I stayed the course. And thankfully I wasn't alone on that journey, but I just, I guess it goes back to being tenacious as a player. I was equally as tenacious as, someone who I wanted women to have the ability and the right to step on the field, and that was hugely important to me, and so I didn't give up.
And Jami, one last question: what does being selected to the U.S. Rugby Hall of Fame mean to you?
I feel like that this recognition is, it's very validating. I spent a lot of time at odds with varying levels of rugby organizing bodies. And so to now be inducted into the Hall of Fame, I can see that it mattered, and I feel like I proudly represent the women of that early era, and know that we collectively, we made a difference.
You certainly have. You certainly have, Jami. I look forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C. in just a few weeks' time, so I can congratulate you in person. But thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all you've done for the game.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for today's With You Rugby podcast. The U.S. Rugby Foundation would like to thank Jami Jordan once again for taking the time to be with us today, and to those rugby fans who tuned in. We'll have more With You Rugby podcasts in the future, so please sign up for our electronic newsletter on our homepage at usrugbyfoundation.org, or look for us on social media. And for more information about the U.S. Rugby Hall of Fame induction ceremony presented by Major League Rugby and other events around the Hall of Fame weekend, visit our homepage. Until next time, everyone, stay safe.